Welcome back to another episode of Consciously Clueless. I'm your host, Carly, and here we break down complex issues around health, the climate crisis, and social justice through a vegan lens. We'll talk about the magic link between your well-being and the planet's health, because luckily, choosing a healthier, mindful lifestyle for yourself often creates healthier vibes for our planet too. Staying consciously clueless means getting to show up knowing nothing, but staying open to all that you can learn. From feasting on plant-based meals and reducing waste to learning to meditate, every step you take contributes to your wellness and makes systematic change for the world. You can make a difference. This podcast will show you how. I'm really glad to have you on the podcast and to be able to connect with you.
It's great. And I'm excited to have you on mine. I have so many questions for you because I've been listening to your podcast for a while. And so this is a total treat for me.
Oh, thank you for saying that. I am so impressed with some of the series you've put out and the accompanying blog posts. So I want to get into everything too.
Fabulous.
Let's start with your business. This is how I found you, through podcasts and coaching and cooking. Tell me a little bit about that world and we'll go from there.
So I think to talk about Brownble, our business, and this little sort of online hub that we have, I have to go back a little bit more to when I went vegan. So
Perfect.
I went vegan, let's say 12 years ago at the point in which we're recording this. And although cooking has been my passion since I was 15 years old, I have studied cooking for decades, and it's always been one of the big loves of my life. I had a bit of a tough circumstance growing up, and cooking was something that kind of got me out of it, and studying cooking and learning from cooks. And I would get home from high school and watch cooking videos. It was just something that really developed as a hobby and something fun and
Sounds like it was comforting for you.
so comforting. It was such a comfort. It was, I think, my first try at something related to mindfulness, even though I didn't have that word back then. It was, I do have to say, a little bit of an escape, but also just a deep connection to the present moment of doing something with my hands, with my eyes, with my nose, with my ears. And it was just the most special thing. And so I had always been interested in cooking. I had a lot of great influences and teachers through the years, and it was a big part of my life. But then I decided to go vegan, and we can get into all of the specifics of that if you want to. But then I decided to go vegan, and the passion for cooking just went sky high. It was an explosion of my interest and the discoveries I was making, and the challenge of having to recreate dishes that I loved for the people that I loved, that would now incorporate all of these ethical beliefs that I want to say that I now had, but it's not true because we always have them. They accompanied me from the moment I was a little kid and a huge animal lover. But it's when you make that connection, right? It can't happen before then. And so cooking just became this thing that consumed my life. I was a teacher, but every other second of the day, I was cooking and making recipes. And I wanted to write about veganism, and I wanted to share about veganism. And I was listening to podcasts about it. And it just became this passion. And one day I was at a coffee shop with my husband, and I told him, I would love to be able to teach people, whether they were vegan or not, how to transform plants into something absolutely scrumptious and delicious, and just transform the idea that people have about the plate. And I said, I wonder if I could teach cooking classes. And we lived in a small town outside the city. It was not feasible. It wasn't practical. And he said, well, why don't we do it online? And this was before, Carly, this was before online courses. This was before, we've had the business for 9 years. So masterclass didn't exist. Teaching online practically didn't exist. I think the only places where people taught online were actual college programs that were online, things like that. So it was like mind blowing if we were even going to be able to pull it off. But slowly but surely, we got it together, and it's been evolving for 9 years straight. And now we're this hub that encompasses our podcast, where we share information for free to anybody who wants to be informed about these issues. We have a YouTube channel with recipes that people can cook also for free. And we have our membership to our online school, where you will learn everything you need to learn about vegan cooking, and also courses about going vegan, the lifestyle aspects, because of course being vegan isn't only about the food. And it's just been growing and growing. It's been our baby. It's a labor of love between my husband and I, because we're partners in life and in business. And it's been such an important and special part of our lives. And we've met so many people through it that it's made the journey so special.
It's so clear that this passion is coming from your soul. And I love it so much, which is, I think, why I was drawn to you. I actually looked at some of your blog posts first, and just the language you use, the way you talked about things, I was like, oh, she cares and she gets it in a real way. Because I think, of course, like you said, veganism is more than food. Food's a huge part, and I love that part. But sometimes I do struggle with maybe recipe developers or food bloggers that don't talk about any of the intersections and leave that stuff out.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be the highlight, is it just, but just because that's a part of veganism, right? And you do that so seamlessly that it's just clearly comes from that passion, and you can hear it. And I just love it, Tejas.
Carly, thank you so much. That's the kindest thing to say. You're too kind. I think the food aspect is such a central part of what people share, because visually it's beautiful. It's appealing. It's, I think, where a lot of people have the first initial questions about the worry.
Totally.
The initial worry isn't about where you're going to, what kind of shampoo you're going to switch to. It's, how am I going to feed my family if I have a meat eater as a husband and two teenagers that just want nothing to do with it? Or what am I going to do when we have Thanksgiving together as a family? All these kinds of things. And one thing that where we center a lot of our content around are those social connections, those difficult moments, those imperfect moments, because I think people often think it's the food, it's the questions about protein, but we've taught thousands of students through the years, and the issues, the problems, the difficulties, when there are difficulties, because some journeys are seamless and wonderful, and that does happen. But when there are stumbles, it always has to do with living among people who are not vegan, who don't share your views. What do I do with this person that I love so much, but they don't share my values, or they probably do share the values, but they're not in contact with them in the same way. They haven't made a choice. They're afraid to make a choice. They're going at this at a different pace. And so that's a huge part of it. But of course, it's a lifestyle. And I don't mean that in the way where people say, oh, the vegan lifestyle has become such a trendy word in social media, right? But when I talk about a lifestyle, I always use the analogy, and I know you like visuals because I'm a huge fan of your podcast, so I know you love this, but I like this idea, and it's what I tell my students, of thinking of veganism as a filter through which you view every single choice you make throughout your day. So if you were to put on some tinted glasses, a pair of sunglasses that had this filter of, and what is the filter? The filter isn't making the perfect vegan choice each and every time. It's not getting a laminated card at the end of the year that says you're still vegan. Congratulations, you did it. It's, I'm doing the best that I can do for animals. This is where this originated. And there you can also add, because I'm a huge believer that our worries about our health, our worries about the environment, all of that can come together, right? You don't have to pick and choose. In fact, it does come together. And that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it. And so you decide every morning that these are the glasses that you're going to put on. It doesn't matter if you made a different choice at breakfast because you were at an airport in, I don't know, Oklahoma somewhere. No diss to Oklahoma, but just I don't know, pick any.
It was fair. That feels possible. I don't know.
City where there maybe aren't any options and you had to make a choice that was imperfect. It doesn't matter if you if you still have something that's made out of down
Right.
in your house, if you're still using your old car that maybe has leather seats, any of those small things that you would probably now make a different choice if you have the possibility to make it, that filter in those glasses that you're putting on every day, that's going to be a guiding light. And no matter what happened today, tomorrow you wake up and you put on the glasses again, and you keep seeing your actions through that filter. That sort of guides you. It's a guiding light through your life. And that's what I mean when I say lifestyle. And it allows for imperfection. And I think you also agree with me on that, where we do the best we can as often as we can. And yeah, that's a big part, I think, of what I love to share with people. And it takes the pressure off, I think.
Yeah, and I wrote down something because I really liked, you said somewhere on your website, if it was in a blog post or something, that not seeking perfection, but I'll challenge you with new information.
Yeah.
And that's that intersection, right? Because it's a privilege to be able to try and do things perfectly. And it's also a privilege to tune out when you can do things, right? So it's like doing what's within our means. I'm going to challenge you. Maybe you didn't know about this and you could do more, or you could make a different choice. And how cool is that? Not saying that you need to do it perfectly, but yes, there's a challenge there to say, I don't think you're shitty, but these things are shitty. What can we do about it? And so I like that you hold both of those truths. I appreciate that, because as frustrating as it is, sometimes I try and hold both of those truths as well.
It's so hard, right? I
Yeah.
remember one of the first book I ever read, where I first read the word vegan. I had never heard of this word before. Nobody talked about it. There weren't vegan options. There weren't vegan restaurants when I first encountered the word. And it was in Alicia Silverstone's book, The Kind Diet. And I remember her describing finding out about the issues that are happening to animals, but also the human beings that work in these industries, also our environment, also the neighboring communities of slaughterhouses, of factory farms, how this affects so many areas, how it affects our health, and how when she found out all this information, she kept preaching to everyone she met, which I know sometimes is very off-putting, but she said how I couldn't help myself, because what I wanted to say was, fire! There's a fire! There's this huge fire. Why isn't anyone running from it? Why isn't anybody doing anything? And that is such a true aspect of what I feel on the inside. I still believe that these issues are so dire. We need to take action. We need to take more action. But we also need to incorporate the fact that we are all so different, and we all go at this journey in different ways. If we try to make a cookie cutter path for everyone, most people are going to fail. And so it is about playing with those things. But always, my whole mission is to keep challenging people and to say, okay, you feel comfy, you feel good where you are. Well, what else can we do? That's what I apply in my life. I'm constantly figuring out. I was going to ask
people are going to
because
trust you, because I think it's clear that you're doing that. You're holding yourself accountable too, right? We don't want to follow the influencers or the podcast hosts or the whoever that feel like they're preaching at you and you're like, what are you doing? Like you can get that vibe sometimes. You can wonder from people on social media, but I think that there's a trust in you, because I'm already sure that you're doing that work too.
Well, I try my best, and I'm always reading and listening and still watching. I know some people, once they're vegan and they've been vegan for many years, it's very hard for them to reconnect with the source of all of this difficult information. Some people never want to see footage of animal cruelty or any of these things. I stay there because that's my fuel. That's how I keep this bubbly and active, and that's how I hope to inspire people. And there can be space for both. We are such complex beings. We have so many different sides to us. We can have a side that is questioning how we're doing things and trying to be better without this obsessive pressure over details that are not as important.
Or even in our control.
Or even in our control. And there are so many things that we can make changes about. And sometimes I've gotten criticism because they tell me that I've been too soft on people and I should be pushing people more. And what I always want to say about that is I have these deep conversations with all of our students because I don't know why. We've had the most incredible students through the years. They always share what the journey is like, what has been going on for them. And very few of them stay where they started. Very few of them. So many of them, when they did need an initial go at your own pace and go slowly and don't worry about this thing that happened when you were traveling to this place where there really wasn't anything to eat. Don't worry about that. Keep going. Those people sometimes became vegan activists. Sometimes those people started a blog or a podcast years later. It's very few times that I encounter a student that hasn't kept on climbing to taking more and more actions. And so it goes to show that there's recipients for all kinds of messages. And I wanted to ask you, because you've been podcasting for a very long time, and you're also so great at balancing out, allowing imperfection, and also sharing all of this information that is critical to so many aspects that are important to us. I wonder if this is something that you've also experienced, that there are people with different kinds of messages, that there should be people with different kinds of messages, that some people should be sharing on social media, the very graphic videos, but other people need the softer content, the more sort of palatable content, and that not everyone's going to react to the same thing. What's been your experience with that? Because I always ask fellow advocates that question.
I think it's a great question, and thank you for saying that. It's something I have grappled with for years as an activist in general. I, in school, was started as an activist. I was a women's studies and sociology major and women's studies major. So I was like, oh my God, the world, everyone listen to me before veganism. So I was already like, guys, the world's on fire. Did you know? And that didn't go over well all the time. And so at 20, I was learning how to talk about things that were hard that not everyone in my life wanted to hear about.
Yeah.
And I did the classic 20-year-old or mid-aughts, early aughts, start a feminist blog. So I just practiced, and I didn't realize that's what I was doing at the time. But I was practicing talking to people in different ways, because how I was talking to people in person was maybe different than how I was talking on my blog. So I think for years I've grappled with that. I still grapple with that. I think social media has made me have to think about that, not only for how different messages from different people are necessary, but how I will have different messages sometimes based on how I'm feeling in the work I'm doing. So sometimes I'm like, oh my God, hashtag blessed. I am so grateful. There are so many things. I'm feeling mindful. I am in my like space, and that is, I want to share meditation. I want to share a grounding meditation. And other days I'm like, wow, okay, so I just read this report, and I'm actually really scared, and I'm feeling like we have to talk about this. And so I'm learning how to allow different messages to be from me as well, if that makes sense, because social media, when I first went vegan, I was like, I have to sound like this. And then when I first started talking about yoga and mindfulness online, I was like, oh, now I can't really sound in this way because it all has to be mindful in a different way. And so I don't do it. But if you scroll back through years and years of my Instagram, you can see shifts in just like how I'm talking about things. It's only within the last couple of years that I've been like, oh, not only do different people hear things differently, and we need space for that, but I feel differently about these issues on a day-to-day basis, and I'm allowed to express all those versions too. Because just like the loving kindness meditation connects us, just like the rage for injustice, I'm just allowing all of those things in myself. And so when I started to do that, it was easier to realize that, yeah, I need to hear messages differently every day. So of course other people do, even though a lot of time, fire, right? Like
Exactly.
that's there, but it's really some compassion for myself that has helped me remember that not everyone wants to hear me scream at them. turns out.
I loved your answer because you touched on a couple of things that I always think about. And one of them is that we're human beings in this cultural context that we're in right now. And a huge chunk of that culture right now is social media. And with social media, what I'm seeing as someone who didn't grow up with we're seeing this focus on a more performative aspect of lives, not just the sort of literal or what you would think I was referring to when I say performative in terms of trying to be advocates for causes and just putting it on social media. I'm not referring to that, but I'm referring to this idea that we're almost living, or many people are living, lives that are so perfectly manicured and created before putting it out there that we forget about so much of the nuance that makes us human beings. And so I think that social media, when you are a content creator, when you have a podcast, when you have a blog, when you have an online presence, there's all of this bombarding of information that reaches you that tells you you need to have a message. You need to have this clearly packaged way to present yourself into the world. It's what social media does. It's all curated feeds. We all choose what we are going to show, how we're going to show it, and that's what you're seeing in social media. But I loved your answer because I think what you do is exactly the path forward. You have to be the person that you are. You have to allow for all of these different facets and days. And anyone who sees you is going to see that as authentic and is going to say, that's me right there. That's how I feel. One day I feel this way. One day I can't watch the footage. One day I need the footage. And it's important because there's no rhyme or reason for the people that are going to receive the information in whatever way. I always thought of myself as someone who is so incredibly sensitive. I will cry at every movie. I will cry reading books. I will cry if I see suffering of any kind.
And you almost made me cry when you were complimenting me. So I was like, yeah, same.
Okay. So you understand. I cry at everything. I'm a highly sensitive person. If I see images, footage, I can't forget about it. I can never take it out of my mind. And so if you had asked me over 12 years ago, I would have said, I could never watch the footage of what happens to animals. Like I could never do that. And it was the most graphic footage that was the only thing that worked in helping me make this change. And so there's no rhyme or reason. Anybody who knows me would say, don't show Kim that. Don't let her see it. We're never going to hear the end of it. She's going to start crying and never stop. And that was the thing that did it. Like I said, I had read Alicia's book. I had read that on a flight from New York to here to Spain, where I live currently. And I cried the entire flight. Flight reading that book.
Not an international flight.
Yeah, it was crazy. I read the whole book cover to cover on that flight, cried the entire time. I got home. I tried making some changes. I did not, this was so long ago, there weren't vegan options. There wasn't the word anywhere on the supermarket. You can find tofu at the supermarket. The only thing you can find was soy milk, sometimes in large supermarkets. And so I just went back to old ways. I couldn't, I would read recipes and I would say, okay, but I can't find this and I can't find this and I don't know where. And it wasn't that it didn't exist. It was that there was this thing called a health food store that no one taught me about because it was so far away from the life that I led as a meat eater. And it turns out there were places to buy all of these things and they did exist back then, but you do have to do a little bit of research. And I just had this one book and it just stayed in the back of my mind. Those words in that book just stayed there. And I just felt like this thing that I'm doing every day, it's wrong for me. I don't feel comfortable with this, but I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do about it. And then thank goodness came the glorious gift that is Netflix. And with it, all of the documentaries.
You are not the first person to give Netflix credit for their veganism on this podcast. Seriously.
Oh my gosh.
I'm like the biggest net fangirl or anything, whatever, but I swear I'm going to make stickers that Netflix made me vegan because people will
People use that.
I had no idea, but yeah, and exactly. We're giving so much publicity to Netflix here for free. But it's so true. These documentaries that started appearing on Netflix that I might have never found otherwise. Because when I don't want to date myself here, although I'm fine saying my age, but when I used to watch films in perhaps the age at which I was my most feisty and wanted to change the world, which starts in your teenage years, you had to go to Blockbuster and grab and rent a video. And I don't even think I would have browsed the documentary section, but
Couldn't have told you. I could not, now that you're saying that out loud, couldn't have told you if when there was still videos up here in my hometown, if there was a documentary section.
maybe not.
I have
maybe not.
no clue. That's
Maybe
wild
not.
that you just said that. I'm
Right,
like,
right. So this documentary pops up. It was the documentary Vegucated. And that was the first time I ever saw footage, visual graphic footage of what happened to animals. And then I watched Earthlings, and then I watched then I went down the rabbit hole you go through, right? You watch all of these documentaries. Then I started getting other books, and that's what did it for me. And for the most sensitive person ever, any of my friends, my husband, anyone will tell you that's me. It was looking at the most horrendous thing that made me make one of the most important shifts that I have made in my whole life. I just got goosebumps just saying it because it's meant the world. It's such a special shift in the way you see everything. Yeah.
well, and you're just highlighting the complexities and you're starting to answer. I was going to circle back to how you go vegan, but you're starting to get there.
Right.
But what I love is that not only did you highlight that we all need to hear different messages and we all have strengths in delivering different messages. So you're saying like, I will cry at a dog food commercial. I am so emotional. I am so sensitive. And I needed to see this brutal footage, but that's not the content that feels best for you to produce. Which is another complexity, right? That was something that visually you needed as an input, but output, like you have a different way of delivering the message from that place, which again just highlights that you have that information and you're coming from a place of activism, really, with all of your work, but you're doing it in a way that people are going to hear differently than you did.
Yeah. And I think that's been the place for our podcast, because these issues, they're so complex. They're so hard to wrap your head around. I think that people need a lot of support when listening to this information, when watching this information. And I admire those content creators that can put video together. One person off the top of my head that I can think of is Ed Winters, who I think he's the most incredible human being. He has done so much to change this world. I admire everything he does. He's truly remarkable. And I admire that in people, that you can grab these visuals, that you can use these words, that you can put this information out there in short videos and long videos and show people. And for me, the place where I found where I felt comfortable in explaining it the way I felt I needed to hear it was through the podcast. And we have different spaces, and that's the beauty of media. You have different formats for different things, and find the place where you can really connect to the reason why you did it, where you can really connect with what you want to share. And so I think that our school it's helping people with the how, but I never wanted to leave people without the why and without a constant stream of remembering why. And that's where our blog comes in. That's where our podcast comes in. That's where these conversations come in, because it's so important. You cannot succeed if this is not an important priority for you and something where you're connected to your motivation, because we still live in a world that is mostly not vegan, that makes it harder sometimes.
Yeah, and it's such a good point to highlight the way you can use different media for these different conversations, right? I'm sure you've heard me say this, but I Googled how do you start a podcast years ago, and I was having these revelations of, oh my gosh, I am plant-based, and I had watched my grandma start to deteriorate from dementia. And so I was like, oh my gosh, brains and health. And then I was like, whoa, environment and animals and whoa, all the other things, just mind-blowing stuff. And then I was struggling to find spaces that felt good to me to have these conversations and be able to get it wrong, to not be perfect, and to hear from people but still hold each other accountable, right? To like try and do both of those. And I love having conversations like this because I think it highlights exactly why both of us want to share stories and talk to others, just because it highlights already the myriad ways people get to similar places, which is always so fun to me to ask someone, so how'd you get to going vegan? Because there's so many different ways. And it sounds like
Absolutely.
Netflix got you. Is that accurate? Was the final thing?
Sure. That's what did it. It was seeing, maybe if it hadn't been Netflix, it would have been some other streaming service or some other way in which I would have found this love of documentaries, which started with my love for vegan documentaries. But it was seeing what the animals went through. And I remember watching this documentary, and there was this scene with this cow, and you could see a close-up of the cow's eyes, and the cow was in line for the slaughterhouse. And I just went straight to 2 days before, where I had taken my dog to the vet, where my dog gets treats, where my dog gets held, where she is so taken care of, where she is given painkillers if she has pain, where she is just looked after in so many ways. And she has absolute terror of being handled, put on the table, grabbed, having all of these things done. And I saw that cow and I said, there's no difference. What, there's no difference here. I could see my dog in the eyes of that cow. And I know this is a very common thing. A lot of people get here because they make that connection with their companion animals that they love as if they were their kids. But it was just this, it was seeing that. It was seeing what these living creatures that want to live go through. And then, of course, I was just sitting on my bed after watching this, and I was thinking, well, the documentary answered a few questions, but I said, I need to research this more, because you do need to find different sources, because we all have biases, right? And I need to figure out if I can survive, if my body can survive on a vegan diet, because I knew no vegans. I had no point of reference. I was going to be the first person in my group of friends and my family, and just the first person I knew to make this change. And I said, well, I need to figure out if I can get everything I need. And so then I went down that rabbit hole. And then you find out, hey, wait a minute. It's not only fine, it can be better for you if you learn how to plan it right, and if you're making sure you get your nutrient bases covered. And then I found out about the environment. And then I found out about the benefit to humans. And I was just like, why is this not more well known? That was with the simple action of the food you put on your plate. Because it really is simple when you see the broad implications of it. It's something you can control. You do not need to wait for legislation. You do not need to wait for governments to pass. The work needs to happen in all areas at the same time. But this is something that you can do. And once you learn how to put it in place and have it be seamless and have it integrated into whatever lifestyle you have, time you have, money you have, it's so impactful. And that just changed everything. And I've never looked back from that day.
So then was it pretty quickly after that I know you said you were talking with your husband, he was like, well, what if you taught online? And 9 years ago, you're like, that's crazy. So was that pretty shortly after that you were?
No, it was about 3 years after. I had already been vegan, and I was already comfortable in those shoes. I had already been vegan for a while. I had tons of lab work to see if everything was working. I don't know. It's just feeling comfortable, where it was just an extension of the life that I led. I didn't even have to think about it.
Totally.
That's when I really started to feel that I could teach it. And I think it was the right time. And in spite of that, Carly, and I'm sure you referred to earlier content of yours, and I'm sure you can relate to this. My message has evolved, and the way I talk about things has changed and evolved. And there are videos and things that I've put out 9 years ago that I would never explain in that way today. I would
Oh my God.
the message is there. I've always had the same message.
Yep.
Let's try our best to change these situations and let's take care of ourselves. But the video I would make today on the same topic would be explained in a much different way. So it still has evolved and changed. But yeah, and my cooking, of course, has evolved and changed. And I've learned so much, and I've learned how to transmit the information better. And I've also learned, and that's been maybe the most special part, as a teacher, accompanying so many students through the years, you learn about what's working for people, what's not working for people,
Right.
where people need more support, what isn't practical, what could be explained in a better way, what would help people more, what are people really asking when they say they're struggling, what is really behind that. So yeah, that has taken years, and it's still an ongoing process.
I know you talk about mindfulness.
Yes.
Like I do. We both are mindfulness lovers, it seems.
Absolutely. Oh, it changed my life.
And couldn't agree more. And I love that you talk about it in relation to food, not only in relation to food, but something I've seen you talk about is that mindfulness and relationship with food. Is that something that had to evolve for you to get to the place you are with food now?
100%. And it's so strange because I don't think there's another way of eating on this planet that is more linked to mindfulness or mindful eating, if you want to call it mindful eating. When you get down to mindful eating specifically, we all have this idea of, okay, it's setting a nice table, it's sitting down calmly, it's savoring every bite, it's checking in with yourself to see how your hunger and fullness levels are doing. All of that is true. But mindful eating is also about taking the steps, retracing the steps of the food that got to your table, and taking the food that is there, that we have this immense gratitude for, that fuels our activities and our daily lives, and taking that from the seed that the farmer had and the time he needed to put it on the ground, the conditions of the ground, the water that had to water that plant, everything you had to do to make that plant survive, which is not easy, the harvesting, the taking that into the truck that's going to take it to your supermarket, from your supermarket to finding it and getting it and taking it home, preparing it, all of those things. I think you would probably agree with me, and if not, you can tell me, but to me, the way I understood mindfulness when I got started and the way I still see it now, it's an excuse to practice this attunement and this presence, right? And so it doesn't matter if you're doing a meditation, it doesn't matter if you're in a yoga pose, it doesn't matter if you're preparing a plate of food, it doesn't matter if you're petting your dog or sitting and having a conversation with a friend. It's this practice again and again, just like veganism, of this way of seeing life through presence and attention and understanding and knowing what's happening in your mind. And I had a very tumultuous relationship with food growing up because, of course, that focus on cooking, which was an escape for me, it came with just creating food and having a lot of food available. And food was also very big source of emotional comfort. And that comes with all sorts of issues and difficulties. And so finding mindfulness really changed things for me in that regard as well.
That's really beautiful. And I love that you will share about that part of your story, because that is not uncommon, right? To have those relationships with food that can be unhealthy or can cause stress in other areas of our life. And there can be some equating of diets, and then specifically like plant-based diet. And it's not to say that there aren't things that come with. I know you did a post about potential emotional side effects and why those come up, but I love that you talk about that in this kind of whole rounded way as a part of your journey, but not necessarily connected to that plant-based eating. Does that make sense?
It does. So it's so tricky, right? Because this very generous way of eating that takes into account so many things that are outside of yourself has also through the years become this very trendy word and this very trendy way of eating. And attached to that have been added lots of very rigid rules
Yes.
and different meanings to what it means to be vegan. And it does, I don't want to say with that it doesn't mean that some people do need to have their food and their intake look a particular way because they have a condition or they have
Totally.
a preferred way of eating. We all have body autonomy and we should be able to decide what's good for us. But one thing that I always want to remind people is to watch out for those signals of when the diet has become this extreme source of worry and perfection in which you're adding lots of layers that
Yes.
maybe don't need to be there. And that still doesn't mean that you're not going to be taking care of yourself and making good choices. So there's this place of balance in the middle that is actually much wider than what people think.
Mhm.
And I'd like to share about that because often what I find when I'm helping our students and my expert, I don't help them with nutritional advice. I'm not a dietitian, right? I do send them to the resources and the people that I find are the best at it. But when people are asking me questions about cooking and about just organizing their meals and all of the things that I teach them, so many times I saw a lot of suffering with food there.
Mm.
And I think that finding a more mindful place with it, being able to recognize when certain things are getting out of balance in whatever way that is happening, but it's very often, unfortunately, happening in the plant-based world towards the edge, extreme restriction, which is worrying because I think it's at the base for a lot of people deciding not to be vegan anymore. And they blame it on the vegan diet, and it's not related to the vegan diet.
It's like the commodification. It's the capitalism, really, that listeners are so probably tired of me saying this, but it is, right? That's the point. Like it all comes back to these things. And as soon as it got, you can see, even in the last few years where I've been paying more attention, just this like commodification of the idea of plant-based and it as a diet and getting lumped into diet culture, like
Mhm.
paleo or Atkins
Yeah.
or whoever that guy was, like putting it in the same category as that is really alarming to me and
Yeah.
really detrimental to it as a movement.
Yeah. One thing I always like to remind our students is that we need to be smart about using all of our senses in as we go through this journey. And included in that is that inner sense and that inner knowing of seeing when something isn't feeling right. And if something isn't feeling right, the first place you go to is a registered dietitian. You go to a registered dietitian who will help support you and see what's going on, because sometimes the stress, the anxiety, the worry, the not feeling that great, it sometimes means you need more food, more of a specific nutrient,
Right.
more supplementation. So that's an initial place because I help them with the culinary aspect and the meal building aspect and all of those things, not from a nutrition perspective, but from a culinary perspective. But because that's where I start my teaching, it's often where people are having the struggles, right? So that's a first place that you can, something isn't feeling right. Let me book an appointment with someone if I can, or let me buy a book on vegan nutrition, for which I
Yeah.
always recommend the book Vegan for Life by Jack Norris and Virginia Messina. It's a fantastic, not affiliated with them in any way, but it's the most science evidence-based book I think we have right
Beautiful.
now. Recently updated, fantastic if you can't afford to go to a dietitian, for example. But so that's one place. And then another place is really being honest with yourself and seeing how your relationship with food is going. And if you feel any alarm bells go off, if you feel that anything is out of balance, if you have people around you, outside, of course, of the vegan mocking that we sometimes get and the people saying, oh, you're never going to get enough protein or what. But if you have people who are very close to you, who understand what you're trying to do, but they're still maybe pointing out a few things where you are perhaps not seeing something in your relationship with food, find support for that.
Yeah.
And whatever, because of course, like I said, we all have body autonomy. We can all make choices and decisions about how we feel our best and manage our eating in a way that feels good and comfortable for each of us, making sure our bases are covered, of course, all of our nutritional bases. But if we add anything else, is this something that can sustain you and that can accompany you for the rest of your life? Chances are, and this has been a very important sort of guiding question that I've used in my own journey, and I share it with my students in case it helps. That's a good guiding light that will tell you this thing, whether it's anything, it's a relationship you have, it's your relationship to exercise, it's your relationship to work, and maybe being excessive with how you're spending your time and that kind of thing. Is this something that I can sustain for life in a comfortable way, where I can still be myself, where I can still have my social connections, where I can still go out to eat, where I can still have these things that make me? And if the answer is no, or you have your doubts about certain aspects, there are people out there ready to support you. Countless podcasts, countless books. You don't have to do this thing alone. And I think that's a big important aspect of mindfulness. It's that presence of noticing, because we have that awareness if we learn how to start listening to that. And that's a part of mindful eating too, I think.
Yeah, that is such a good reminder of those connections with mental health and with eating and with diet culture and with all of it, right? That it makes so much sense how people can become easily overwhelmed and be like, yeah, that's going vegan is a thing that makes sense, but like, where the hell do I start? Because of all of those things, right? And in that vein, you said something earlier about how when you were inspired in the beginning, you were like, okay, I can remake all my favorites. I'm so excited to figure out how to do that with food. And I know for some people, they're like, that's my nightmare. That's where I'm like out, is then I have to figure out, right? So if you have just a few tips for people, I know you have so many, you have a whole podcast and blog full, but if the top of your head, if you like, people are like, okay, I get it. I hear you too. I've been listening. Maybe I should do more plants, less animal products, but where do I start, right? Where do I start with food?
Exactly. That's such a good question, Carly. So there were so many places you could start, but I think the easiest place to start is with the foods you already love and picking a handful of those and finding ways in which you can see this change. And hear me out, all of the vegans out there. I'm not saying that veganism is only about the food, okay? But when it comes to this particular change a person is making, try to see that change to vegan as the swapping out of an animal-based ingredient for a plant-based ingredient. When you see it like that, it becomes much less overwhelming. Then we'll continue taking steps, and then we're going to get to all the other areas. And then we're going to get to the understanding that it's not about the food only, it's about so many things. It's about that filter. But that's a great place to start. And that could mean that if you love having your pizza night, you are making your pizza with vegan cheese and veggie toppings, or whatever toppings you enjoy. It can mean that if lasagna is your thing, you can learn how to make your bolognese for your lasagna by using TVP or grated tofu and sauteing it until it gets really crispy and adding it to the sauce. It can mean using plant-based milk to make that bechamel for the lasagna. So that's one place where I would start. Another place where I would start is there's this vilifying in the plant-based world of anything purchased and not made from scratch. And there is, first of all, brands and companies are getting better and better at giving people the most natural versions of these foods because they know that's what we want. We want to have foods that are good for us because we also care about our health. But check out different brands, see if you find one that you're comfortable with, and also see that some of these foods are actually going to aid you in meeting nutrient needs better than some things that you just might put together some vegetables and that might not be enough. So don't be scared of them. They can be a part of your transition and they can be a part of your life post-transition for the rest of your life. It's not something that you have to eat every day if you're not comfortable with that. you can choose when it's time for those foods, and that can be helpful. And then another tip that I would give people is well, of course, in our school, we teach you from day one to learn how to make these very elaborate meals. All of the path is there for you, and we go through it step by step. But I would tell people, do not think that you have to make a meal that looks Instagram worthy, that has all of these. Keep it simple.
It's one of my favorite tips. I was like, I went vegan. I was like, well, I guess I have to be an Instagram chef now, and I can't share this because it's just a waffle.
And so you have to make from day one, you have to make this veggie bowl that has 11 components, all of them of different
ingredients
colors.
You've never heard of.
Yeah, we can get there, and those vegetables are delicious. I make them all the time, but many people, many registered dietitians that specialize in this will have meals that are just some rice and some sauteed tempeh and some steamed broccoli or some kale. And that's simple. That meal right there. Don't think that you have to, make absolutely everything from scratch, although that's what I'm here to teach you. But you can combine and you can simplify. And another big important tip that I have that I share in our school all the time are things that are not related to cooking that are going to help your cooking. And that means being organized. That means organizing your ingredients in your fridge so you can see them, getting organized with a system for shopping and for planning out your meals. That can be as simple as a Post-it note. It can be a Post-it note stuck to your fridge. People think that meal planning and batch cooking and all of these things that a lot of us talk about, because they are incredibly helpful, and I do teach them, that it means you have to spend your entire weekend portioning out 500 different containers that no one has space for, by the way, in their freezer or fridge. But that it takes forever, that you have to individually portion out everything, that you have to have every meal and snack planned for the week. And a plan can be as simple as, if you love to go to your farmer's market and you're there and you bought the things that looked good and you brought them home, take 5 minutes, grab a Post-it note and write out the types of meals that you were thinking of when you said, this bunch of kale looks fantastic. And then you thought, okay, kale Caesar salad. Write that down in a Post-it note, paste it to your fridge. And you know that the components for something similar to that are in that fridge every time you walk into your kitchen. That can be one method. I teach 5 different methods within our school, but it can be as simple as that. And having a bit of a plan, having organization, one thing that helps tremendously that people laugh at, and that I sometimes feel weird explaining to people, but no one does this, or very few people do this, is at the end of your day, take a few moments to clear the counters of your kitchen, clear out your sink. Because how often have we said, okay, I've washed everything, I put everything in the dishwasher, but I'll wash this pot tomorrow, or I'll handle this tomorrow. Every time we walk into our kitchen and we don't see an empty space to work with, we are going to feel a little bit less motivated to try. And 100%. The thing that helps with cooking and to improve your cooking is trying and noticing that it can be so easy and so simple once you learn a few recipes, a handful of dishes that you love and you enjoy. And then if you want to take it further, of course you can, but that's essential. And another little trick for the kitchen, right before you go to bed, after you've cleared your counters, everything is put away, and you have that empty space waiting for you. Open your fridge and spend 5 minutes seeing what you have, rearranging things, making sure you can see everything, move everything that's about to go bad or that has been there for a few days, move it to the front. And just that moment, it's going to prime you for whatever is going to happen in your kitchen the next day. So Carly, so many of the roadblocks we have to cooking and to good cooking, because a lot of our students come to us because they think, I've been vegan for 5 years, but all my food tastes the same. And all my food is, I keep repeating the same 5 dishes. I want more variety. I say, great, we're going to do that. We're going to add so much variety. We're going to study knife skills and cooking techniques and all of those things, and sauce making basics, French, classic, contemporary, all of that we're going to cover. But I want you to first put these things into practice that have nothing to do with cooking, because they relieve your stress. They help you be more present when you're cooking. They help inspire you. And they remove so many of the roadblocks. And the biggest roadblock people have with cooking is time.
Mm-hmm.
And this helps the process along.
Those are all such good tips. And I love the tip about the kitchen and having that space clear. I live in a tiny home, so it's
You do?
and yeah, and
Oh
have
my gosh.
and before that I lived in my bus that I converted into a tiny home.
I
So
with tiny homes, we could have an entire episode about that.
well, if you come to Minnesota, if you come back to the States,
That's
we can come up
fantastic.
here. I've always been like a tidier person that helps my brain, but in a tiny space, it's even more so because four dishes on the counter and my counter's gone. So it's made it
Exactly.
really important for me to keep things clear because I don't want to cook. That goes down if I go
Right.
in and I'm like, oh, I didn't do those dishes and all of the stuff is sitting out and the Instapot's put away. And I'm like, I don't know. So that's just, they give people that kind of same tip for becoming a runner or working out. Give yourself the least path of resistance. Put your shoes out, put everything out for when you're up in the morning. It's the same idea. Is everything there for you and ready in your brain? I love those tips. It's totally where your mindset, mindfulness comes in too. I love that. This course sounds amazing. I'm like, do I
Oh.
need to low key do this course someday?
Thank you so much. That's so kind. Yeah, exactly. It's all of those little things that are going to just, one thing that I always say in our podcast and that I teach is that we are currently, like I said, with social media, in a very goal-oriented moment and society where everything is that endpoint and everything is when have you gotten to this place? At what age did you get there? Have you achieved these milestones? Whatever it may be, in whatever circumstance. And that is great. I think we all have goals. That's going to happen naturally. But if we focus on the goal, it's very likely that the process to getting to the goal is going to get messy because life happens. And
Mm-hmm.
the focus needs to not be there, just as like with veganism, it's not about being that word vegan and having made all of your choices perfectly. It's about that filter. With this, you need to focus on systems. That's where
Mm-hmm.
you need to put your focus. It has to be on the systems that will get you to that goal. If you're focused on cooking more, I need to cook more at home, I need to cook more at home, what does that give you? There are no tools there. There isn't a priming for the space you're going to be doing the actual cooking. There's no priming for finding the time to do the shopping or for organizing or for thinking of ideas or for collecting those recipes that you're going to make. And the systems are where our focus should be, because if we follow the systems, we're going to get there eventually.
Oh, I love organization. You're speaking my language. I love it. I'm like, yes, I do a scratched out kind of meal plan for the week in a little notebook and what groceries do I need? And it doesn't always work, but it gives me a jumping off point and it makes me look at whatever the hell's in my cabinet that I'm like, oh, that broccoli kind of stinks. I wonder if I could either freeze that or use it today or something like that, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
food waste in terms of the environment is huge and
Huge.
astronomical, not only a problem for the environment, but we waste our money and waste the
100%.
product
Yeah,
because of not knowing how to store it properly. I'm thinking of doing a series on food storage soon
that's an
because
excellent idea.
just putting my carrots in water, I was like, who knew you had weeks with these babies?
Strawberries in a glass jar
Just
make them
mind
survive so much
blowing.
longer. Yeah, yeah.
And those are the things that can keep you connected to that individual. It makes my life better and bigger
Yeah.
kind of
And Carly, you said
connection.
something right now that is so genius and important. And I can't believe I didn't think of mentioning that. It's such an essential part of success. Flexibility. You
Mm,
said it doesn't always work. Exactly. Have the plan plan for it not always working is what I mean. There are always going to be stumbles. There's always going to be days in which it didn't work out. There are always going to be days in which you had to order takeout or you didn't make that perfect, that, I don't know, that wonderful veggie bowl that you had envisioned.
Literally
That
last
happens.
night, veggie bowl was on my list for dinner and I made a chocolate chip waffle.
Okay.
Because
So
I was like,
exactly.
no, I'm
No,
not.
yeah.
I'm tired. And it was like a homemade waffle. So still, but I was just like, yeah, no, I'm not making a veggie bowl. I'm going to do it tomorrow. And I'm really excited. But
exactly.
no.
Exactly. That's it. So it happens to all of us. It happens to me. And I've been cooking from the age of 15 to now when I'm 42. And I've been cooking every day. I'm a recipe creator. I always have food and ingredients. And sometimes it doesn't work out. And sometimes I just pop some frozen gyozas into a pan and that's my dinner. And that's it. And just make sure that whatever systems you have, there's a space for flexibility. That is one of the secrets to just well-being and happiness, is to be able to say, okay, yeah, didn't go as planned today. Get another shot in 3 hours or 4 hours. There has to be space for that too. That's a big, important key and important aspect to it.
I've gotten a lot better at allowing that for myself and not then going, well, I didn't do Monday's dinner, so this whole thing can go in the garbage, right? Because it's easy to do that. And we want to give ourselves the excuse for the out almost sometimes.
Oh,
And I'm like,
100%.
okay.
And one thing that I talk a lot about in the podcast as well, and in the blog, I've talked about body image, and I've talked about this in relation to our relationship with food, which is always central to what we do. And one exercise that I always give to our students or to friends is to always take a wider perspective of where you are right now. And so, for example, when it comes to body image, you're having a bad body image day. Picture yourself at 90. What would they say about the you of right now? There is not a one thing. Damn, that's it. Damn, that's all they would say. Just like when you see a picture of a particular time in which you were uncomfortable or not happy with the way you looked, or at those awkward teenage years, and now you see a picture and you say, that baby, like, what was so wrong with her? And so we need these exercises in the wider perspective. And so in not even a year, in 3 weeks' time, you're not going to remember that you switched that veggie bowl for that waffle, or that you had to get takeout, or that this meal was burnt in the oven. You're not going to even remember it. So always a wider perspective, and remember why you're doing this. You have so many chances to make a different choice.
I feel like we could chat for hours, undoubtedly, which I adore as a trait in someone else. But I think we should probably do a part 2 someday. I'll be on your show. We'll just find opportunities to keep connecting. But I would love to know, to wrap up, because you've shared that you still are making sure you're watching things that keep you grounded in the vegan movement. And maybe it's some of that hard footage, or maybe it's you're having a hard day teaching and it feels like you don't want to show up, or everyone is human. How do you take care of yourself? We talked a lot about mindfulness, but what does that really look like for you? Maybe day to day, or how does that change? What practices do you rely on to not get washed away in the chaos of the world?
Oh, that's a great question that I am going to steal and ask you when you come on my podcast, because I'm very interested in hearing. I ask that to people all the time. I'm so curious about how people move along their day, because it's such a mystery, right? What do I do to take care of myself? Well, I am in a very crazy, chaotic time of my life, because apart from everything I do, I decided to go back to school at age 40. And I'm getting my degree in psychology to hopefully be able to help support all my students and all of my peeps, and in a more profound way, and all of the other aspects surrounding eating that have nothing to do with the actual food.
Oh, I already know this is so good. This is so good.
So this is going to be the longest process of my life, because I'm doing it very much part-time. and it's going to take years. And so I am at the stage where maybe if you ask me this question in 3 weeks, I'm in absolute crisis. And maybe 2 weeks later, I've found a way around it. And then in finals week, I'm about to jump out the window. But a few things that I find always helps me. I'm a huge journaling fan. I have 2 forms of journaling. I do a 5-minute journal in the morning when I wake up before I study, because that's my prime study time when everybody else is asleep. And I also do long form journaling. I love to write, and I find that's where I work things out. I go to therapy, as I think is just, well, it's what I plan to do in the future. And so it's an important part of my process to go through my own therapeutic process. And therapy has saved my life in general.
Same.
So that's
last week's podcast episode was about me and 5 years of therapy. So
oh my gosh, I haven't
my
seen
solo
that.
episode last week was literally about, I've been in therapy for 5 years for anxiety and depression. Here's what I've learned. So I am here with you.
Same. And I am going to end, when we finish this conversation, I'm going to go and clean my kitchen listening to that episode. But that's a huge part, important part of my well-being. I go on very long walks with my dogs. That is their therapy part 2 for me. I do a lot of different forms of movement. I love exercise, not just as a form of therapy and draining of that anxiety and that stress, because I do have a lot of stress in my life. And so
that feels like my answer. It feels like I'm answering the question.
Wow. So movement is something that I know is not a possibility for everyone. And a good substitution for that is connection and meditation and breathing and all of that. But I do lots of forms of movement. Someday I might ride a bike, and some days I'm trying to lift more weights because I know that it's important, and I haven't always loved it, but
I can tell by the way you started talking, you were like, I'm trying. Okay.
Yeah. Exactly. So that gets in there. I love ballet. I used to dance ballet. So sometimes I do a ballet class. And walking. I do so much walking in nature, and that just heals my soul. And I think those are the biggest things. Those are the things that are present in my life every week without fail, and movement every day without fail. And that's what sort of helps with all of the other tough stuff, because there is a lot of heaviness to the work that we do. I am dying to hear yours, and everybody in Carly's audience. She's going to be in no time at all in my podcast, and I can't wait. I'm so excited. So excited.
I'm so excited. And we talked a little bit before we started recording, but just finding kindred spirits in this work and in this world is so beautiful. And so many times while you're talking, I've said this before, but I don't share the much video, but I forget that I'm over here like nodding like a bobblehead to people. And you're one that I've just been like, yes, oh my God, movement just to get the anxiety out of my body. Yes. So I cannot wait to talk more about all of those things with you and keep finding ways to connect. But is there anything that I haven't given you space to share about that you want to share?
Well, just a little gift that we have for all of your listeners, in case anyone is looking to join our cooking school or just get more support in that way, because we also have included in the school other courses about how to make this transition in all aspects. So everything from the cosmetics you use, from what to do if you come from a family of people who love to go fishing, to what to do if your kids are going to go on a zoo school trip, and how to navigate all of the life stages, all of these things. We have a cheese making course. We have so many different things in that sort of umbrella of the school. So if any of your listeners are thinking about it and want to join, we have a special discount code for everyone. And
oh my gosh.
It does not expire. It's a discount for life. So if you join with a recurring membership, you're always going to have that discounted price. And that's just when you visit brownble.com and you choose your plan and you enroll, just use Carly24 and you get that discount. All for your peeps, Carly, because just to say thank you for having me here, which was the most biggest treat, because I am a huge fan of yours and your podcast. And whenever I listen to your show, I'm always like, and I have to say that doesn't happen to me with a lot of vegan podcasts, because sometimes perspectives vary and methodologies vary. And I'm always happy that everyone has a place in a space. I think we should have as many as we can. But it's fun when you find a podcast that you can listen to any time of day, any day of the week, because it's a similar sort of message. I'm very grateful to have it in my life.
Oh, thank you for those kind words. I am so excited to dive further into your show because I've started listening. I said it started doing the Why Vegan series, and just the way you present information that is so well researched and also palatable is something that I really appreciate and also try to do, and you do it really well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And that's another thing that I would say is if you're at all curious, although I'm sure if people are already listening to your show, they're already so knowledgeable with everything that you've shared. But we do have that series in the podcast called the Why Vegan series, where we cover everything. And it's a great resource, not only to listen to when you're at the start of your journey to understand the issues surrounding this change, but it's a great one to share with anyone that you have in your life that is having some difficulty wrapping their heads around the process, because sometimes we are not the best to share that directly, and they can take it really well when it comes from somebody else. So that's why I made those episodes. It's for people who need that chunk where everything is laid out. And you can find that in our podcast, the More Plants podcast.
It's really a great series, and it is, you've got your sources cited, which is so lovely, right? Because that there are so many things that get shared and I'm like, that's really good, but you didn't share a source. And so now people are going to be like, well, is that your opinion or whatever? But the way with those conversations specifically, you have things so laid out. Oh, it's really well done. It's a really great series.
Oh, thank you.
If you